everyone. We're here today to talk to you sort of everything about penguins, and I'm Fiona. And
I'm Tom, and we look forward to your questions.
yeah, so if you do have any questions, then please send them in. Otherwise, we'll be just chatting about penguins in general, our experiences with them, and everything interesting that we think you ought to know on World Penguin Day. So we thought we'd start off with how many species of penguin there are, because that seems quite a basic question, but most people probably don't think there are as many as there are. So we're in agreement that there are 18 species of penguin, although this can vary slightly depending on how you define different species boundaries. There are 4 of them that live on or close to Antarctica, which probably surprises some people, seeing as everybody imagines penguins as these little creatures that live down in the snow. But actually you get them all over the southern hemisphere. They don't go north of the equator, but you do have them. So do the Galapagos penguins go north? They're kind of on the
equator, and a few individuals from one colony go north. So technically they are in the northern hemisphere as well, but only just.
So that's a good quiz question answer for people. They do go north, but just a few which live on the Galapagos. So you also get them around in New Zealand, Australia. You get some fieldland crested penguins that actually live in the rainforest, which is another good thing to know that not many people probably do. And you get ones which burrow. So in the Falklands, the Magellanic penguins will burrow under these sort of grassy mounds. You also get ones on the Australian coast that burrow as well. Can you think of any other interesting places that penguins reside? Have I used them all up?
Well, no. So Magellanics also exist in the desert. So the stereotype is sort of right in that they like the cold. They like cold water. So they evolved in cold bodies of water, and that's their expertise that still carries through to this day. But in terms of air temperature and where they live, where they're breeding on land, it can be incredibly diverse. As Fiona said, from the rainforest in New Zealand to desert on the east coast of South America, and of course to the subantarctic and Antarctica.
So do penguins have trouble then keeping cold enough or warm enough?
Cold enough, they seem pretty well adapted. I mean, probably when they're at their coldest or when they're most exposed to the cold is when they're diving in cold water, because you can lose a lot of heat through that. But they're very well adapted for it, with a fat layer and also with incredibly specialised feathers that have a double shaft. So they act almost like a down jacket. There's an outer layer that's waterproof and an inner layer that's very downy and traps air. And it traps air even when they're diving. So that's quite incredible that they have this insulating down jacket even at depth. They definitely get heat stressed. You see emperors, so emperor penguins on Antarctica, you can see them panting. Similarly, gentoos quite a lot on a hot day. Although it's covered in snow and ice, Antarctica can get warm. And if we find that if we're overdressed, if we have too much down, or if you have your big down jacket on, you can't walk around or you really start sweating. So even us in Antarctica, we can get heat stressed if we aren't careful. So you definitely see penguins panting and displaying their eating snow yet, and putting their flippers out and kind of radiating heat.
Yeah, I remember seeing some chicks which definitely looked quite warm, and I think that's the one thing I wasn't really expecting, having gone to Antarctica, was to actually feel quite warm at some points and be wanting to take layers off. So yeah, that is something that they have trouble with. And I think their feet as well are quite good. You have the blood exchange, so cold blood coming up from the feet, which can cool the body, and vice versa. When they're in cold environments, then they can basically have those feet, I guess, just above freezing, really, and the rest of their body is nice and warm. If we stood down on the snow in bare feet, then we'd very, very quickly get frostbite, but they don't. They can just stand there the whole time. And also, is it just the kings and the emperors that rock back on their heels?
Yeah.
So that's another adaptation that they have to stop getting cold.
Yeah.
Were you going to say?
The feet and the flippers are incredible. I mean, this is something that in modern buildings we do now for a heat exchange system and heat recovery. But their feet and their flippers are an incredible adaptation to. This is a peripheral exposed area, so it acts like a radiator. So when you're trying to conserve heat, that's a problem. So before blood goes to the feet, they recover the heat. But at the same time, like turning up a radiator, if you turn up the flow, when you're too hot, you can just shed heat. So it's a really cool adaptation that they have.
They are very well adapted to their environment, and I think a lot of people think they're quite funny because they see videos of them on land waddling along, not looking particularly competent maybe. But if you see them in the water, which is really what they're adapted for, you can see that they're very efficient, and their flippers are very good at propelling them forwards. I think one of the questions we get asked a lot is why they can't fly. Obviously, that's one of their most famous characteristics, differentiates them from most other bird species. And one of the reasons that they can't now is they have solid bones. That's something, again, that is different from most other birds, the ones that we'd see out here now. And they've lost the ability because they don't particularly need it. They don't have land predators, really, down in Antarctica. Is there anything sort of in Australia or New Zealand? I guess introduced species, really, like cats and rats on South Georgia would be a problem. But naturally, they didn't really have large land predators, so they didn't need this, whereas it was much better for them to be able to swim efficiently through the water because that's where their food is. They feed on fish, krill, squid, sea creatures, so that's where they need to be at their best. We were having a conversation the other day about the fastest penguin.
And we agreed
We agreed on the Gen 2, I think,
yeah.
but somewhere it said 27 miles per hour, somewhere it said something else. I think the problem is that it's very difficult to know what the fastest or the deepest dive is or anything like that, because they're out of the way in remote places, and just if we don't happen to be monitoring them doing this doesn't mean they can. So I think the deepest diver is the emperor, though.
Yes,
and
that's over half a kilometre.
Yes,
over 500
yeah, yeah.
Can I just correct one thing? So we hope there aren't any rats on South Georgia anymore, as that was part of a massive eradication campaign. And there weren't ever cats, or if there was, it was whaling station only.
South Georgia, but anywhere else?
So I think probably Marion and some of the other sub-Antarctics. But just wanted to clarify.
No, I'm glad you did, because it's been a major success story, actually, as the rat eradication program on South Georgia. And actually, we were there last season, and there were lots of zip pipits. Yeah, and we weren't expecting them to recover as quickly as they had. So it's not just penguins that benefit from that as well. What other questions could we answer? Do they molt?
Yes. So penguins have this thing called a catastrophic molt. So a lot of birds molt individual feathers at a time, partly because they need to fly. I mean, if your anti-predator defense is flying, you can't ever have long periods where you just sat on the ground being a sitting duck, so to speak. But the penguins don't have that problem. So they have this catastrophic molt where they lose all their feathers at the same time. So that doesn't mean they go bald and then new feathers grow. It means that feathers are growing and pushing out, and they just turn into this puff ball and look quite irritated and, literally irritated and itchy. And they lose all their feathers and grow new ones at the same time. So that happens directly after they've finished breeding, and then they replace their feathers for the following year.
And they kind of molt in different ways, don't they? So some of them molt upwards and they're left with a little kind of furry shoal, whereas some of them, they look quite strange. But it's different, and you can compare it to us. We just sort of go around shedding our hair gradually, whereas they lose it all in one go. But then that, of course, means they can't swim. So do you think that's been a problem, for example, in Zawodowski?
So yes, so that's a good point. When they're molting, they can't swim. that's not a problem, because one of the other things that really makes a penguin what it is the ability to fast. So you think of emperor penguins breeding over winter. They've evolved this system that means they're very good at starvation tolerance, either while their partner is going to sea to feed or when they're molting. So in one way it's quite efficient. Occasionally places like Zawodowski Island, like in the South Sandwich Islands, that may mean that they're susceptible to sudden volcanic activity because they can't just swim off to sea. So yeah, there's potentially concerns with things like that.
So I think something else that a lot of people ask about is the breeding. You just mentioned the emperor penguins needing to fast while, so that's the male sitting on the egg for about, could be up to 4 months or so, and the females then go off to sea to forage, but the male is having to last all of that time. So they're building up their mass and their blubber, so they're really quite enormous. They're the largest species of penguin. Can't remember how much they weigh. They can be about 4 foot.
Roughly
how much?
45 kilos when they start breeding.
Compared to about 1.5 kilos for the smallest penguin, the little blue penguin. So you can see there's massive diversity. They're not just all kind of black and white, yay high. So yeah, that's what the emperors do, but that's actually quite different from even the kings, which are probably the species that most people would confuse them with because they look very similar, albeit they're smaller. They tend to live more north, sort of on South Georgia, and yeah, subantarctic islands. And they have 2 lots of breeding throughout the year. So you actually have the fairly grown up, fluffy brown chicks at the same time as there are new eggs. And yeah, those chicks are brown, whereas the emperor penguin chicks are grey. So that's a way you could also tell the difference between the two. But yeah, they're again quite different from other penguins, which a lot of lay 2 eggs, and they have a clutch of 2, and that's just once in the year rather than twice.
So the bigger the penguin, the strategy is just to invest everything in 1 egg and 1 chick, and that's partly, it's larger, they can defend it from predators, but also it's a strategy because they need to, when they need to put everything in to ensure the survival of that 1 chick. The bigger penguins, they have a problem in that they've basically out-evolved or got too big to be able to raise a chick or chicks in a single summer season. So everything else, they start as early as they can in the summer, and they try and fledge that chick or those chicks before autumn. And emperors and kings, basically they're too big for that. It takes too long for a chick to grow up. So they have to go into winter somehow. Now with emperors, it's the adult that takes the hit, and they sit there and they incubate their egg, and then the chick fletches at the end of summer. Whereas in kings, they just leave the chick there for a lot of the winter and occasionally go and provision it. So you get these enormous creches of big fluffy chicks sitting around all winter. And in fact, am I going to take your fact here with the woolly? So some of the early explorers called them woolly penguins, and they thought they were actually a completely different species.
Because they look almost as big, don't they?
Yeah, and they do look different, but of course they're not waterproof. They're very much a big shaggy rug.
Yeah. And how long do they stay in those creches before they fledge?
Well, it's basically the whole of winter, so they are independent of the adult in terms of they're not hanging around with the adult either kind of December or April. So there's this offset breeding in kings where 1 year they start early, then they probably start late the next year, and then they skip a year. So there's always a mixture of the two strategies and the two age groups, and then those are pretty much left for the entire winter, but with a lot of feeding visits where the adults will come back and feed them over winter.
We've had a question. This is very exciting. Do they really mate for life? Yeah, I think there's this image of them very harmoniously living together. And you do have monogamous mating systems, so they will stay with a partner, but it's not always that same partner year on year. Um, I guess maybe partly for practical reasons. You've got one mate coming back, and the time it would take to find them again, maybe.
Yeah, so I think they do in the same way that humans do, i.e. they don't. They're roughly monogamous. Certainly within a single season, they're pretty monogamous. But between seasons, if they were successful in the previous year, they'll very much try and mate with the same partner. But if that partner is late returning, they'll find another one. Or if they failed in the previous year, they'll generally try someone else. The idea of monogamy is a bit of a myth, and actually it's a myth in almost all things where it's referred to in biology. So probably the biggest exception, or the nearest to it, might be swans or albatrosses. But yeah, in general, things can be fairly faithful but don't mate for life.
Yeah, and we often have this sort of cute image of them, but related to their mating behaviour. It's sort of a well-known thing that on the early expeditions they noticed a lot of what they probably thought was unscrupulous, promiscuous, homosexual behaviour, and they were kind of very Victorian about it and coded all those in Greek because, of course, it wasn't appropriate for people to be thinking that. It was too horrifying. But yeah, there's certainly a lot of fighting and cheating and different behaviours going on in penguins. Someone's just asked if they can keep one as a pet. I think that's inadvisable unless this person is living in Antarctica in strange situations. Yes, I think that's a definite no. They're very cute, but yes,
the smell alone, let alone the ethics. So in terms of welfare, but yeah, the smell would put you off.
I was going in for the welfare reasons of no, they wouldn't like it, but I think you probably wouldn't like it either when it had covered everything you own in guano. So probably not. Also, the noise would probably keep you up, and the constantly demanding fish and that sort of thing. But yeah, you can adopt a penguin. Have it virtually. Yeah.
Oh, of course,
we need to mention Penguin Watch. Of course we do. Being World Penguin Day, you might be thinking, what can I do to help the penguins? Well, maybe we should also talk about why you might need to help the penguins in a second. But yes, as it's World Penguin Day, please do go on. It's penguinwatch.org. Just Google Penguin Watch and it'll come up. And you can go online and help the research that we're doing here in Oxford by basically just clicking on penguins for us. It's as easy as that, and it's quite addictive, so you could spend quite a long time today doing it. But by doing that, we get an idea of how many penguins there are in different colonies. We know what time and date we've got those images on Penguin Watch from, and we can begin to piece together what's happening to colonies throughout the year. I don't know if there's anything you want to add. We've had a massive response. Some of you might have already have been involved, and last month it was British Science Week, and we had a massive push to get lots of school children involved, and that's been really successful. So we're now over 5.5 million classifications on Penguin Watch. So maybe today we could get it to 6. If it's World Penguin Day, why not? Anything you want to add?
No, I think that's wonderful. So yeah, come and enjoy penguins on Penguin Watch. And of course, you can support us. You can adopt a colony if you want. And there you go. So that's an ethical way to virtually take a penguin home.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's good.
And smell-free.
Yeah, definitely smell-free. So, yes, in a slightly backwards way then, we should probably explain why we think that we're needing to monitor penguins in this way. So there are a lot of changes going on down in Antarctica at the moment, both environmental, which is linked to, human-induced factors and then more direct human factors. So the krill fishing industry is something that we're particularly interested in. And krill are a little tiny crustacean that live in the Southern Ocean, and they're what we call a keystone species. So basically everything comes back to krill in the end in the Southern Ocean. You have massive whales, little penguins, everything feeding on krill. And if they have increased competition for this food resource, then it's probably going to be having an effect on them. And the krill fishing industry is expanding. Krill are increasingly in demand for things like fish for food, so in aquaculture, and also as pharmaceutical products. So these sort of omega-3 style krill health supplement tablets, which another way you can help penguins is to avoid those. And they also have a new technology now for harvesting these creatures, which is basically, put simply, a big vacuum cleaner that pumps up krill from the ocean while they're still alive, and they can process them much more efficiently in this way, which basically means taking a lot more.
It's not necessarily a lot more. I mean, the concern, so the threats to penguins are several. In terms of fishery, I think the concern is a density argument. So we're getting much better at taking a lot from a limited area. So that's a concern and something we're investigating with Penguin Watch. And then, of course, there's climate change, particularly in terms of sea ice and sea ice loss, because krill breed under that. So really everything comes back to krill and a little bit of direct disturbance. But of course it's all interlinked. So we see effects of climate change that either might be on sea ice and on krill, or it might actually be that allows in fishing vessels to areas they couldn't get in the past. Yeah. So it's something that this is what the data you help us generate in Penguin Watch. This is what we're answering, so that we can effectively manage it. You know, there actually should be enough krill for everyone. It's where and when we take it.
And that's nice because it means that if we can implement policy, then this is something that we can make a big difference with. I think often with climate change, people think, how much can one person do? But we can really make a difference with the penguins. And I think it's a very good point you made about the fact that everything is interlinked. Do penguins live in the Arctic or Antarctica? We can do that one. I should know. Yes, so they live down south in Antarctica, which means all of those Christmas cards you see with penguins and polar bears living together is not the case, although maybe the polar bears would like that. Yeah.
I haven't seen Christmas cards in quite a few years. So.
Tom hasn't been home for Christmas in a long time, so the world of Christmas is quite alien to him, but yes, I'm sure you will agree with me.
And I hope no one would dare to send me a polar bear and a penguin on the same thing.
You would hope not. But yeah, that's something I get surprisingly asked quite a lot. Seeing which pole they live in. How do penguins contribute to their environment? Interesting.
How do they contribute? So we've got two questions here actually. How do they contribute to the environment? Well, they're a predator, so they are taking krill primarily, but also fish and squid. How do they contribute is primarily through poo. So they give back, if you like, via becoming prey for things like leopard seals and also to orca occasionally. So they're not quite a top predator, they're eaten by other animals. So that's one way of giving back, if you like. And then poo is quite a big thing. They fertilise the environment, they fertilise the land. So you see certainly where historic colonies were, and they do move around occasionally, you see moss banks and small Antarctic grass growing. So they are part of a kind of nutrient cycle. The other question I liked there was how accurate was Happy Feet? Accurate in a way. I mean, the rough story, as in concerns over fishing and impact on the environment, is true to the sense that that is one of our biggest questions. That's exactly what we're looking at. So obviously they don't dance. They do sing to a degree. The calls are quite a big thing for them, but they're not a song as such. But the other thing, when they're walking around, when they're moving in that film, they got the motion and the characteristics really well. So it's like, it is a cartoon, or if you were stereotyping a friend or doing an impersonation, that's how I see Happy Feet. It has certain elements of the movement and behaviour very, very well.
Also, I think there's a happy few too, right? And it has Will and Bill the krill.
Oh, yeah.
And I think anything that makes krill cute is probably a good thing. I don't know the answer to this question.
Why do penguins come to Brazil in summer and
Die due to heat.
You do occasionally get lost penguins. So I believe I've heard a couple of those into Brazil, and I believe it was king penguins. So coming up from either the Falklands, Patagonia, or potentially South Georgia. They're rare and they're usually lost. And why do they die to heat? It's because they're outside of their normal environment, so they can very easily get heat stressed on land and actually in the water. So if the water temperature is too big, they're too hot, that's
goes back to what we were talking about earlier with their adaptations and the different species living in different environments. So yeah, lost penguins. I think there's another question coming in. Wait for that one. Are there any subspecies going under the endangered banner? That's a good question. Yeah.
So this is something. So Gemma Klukas has been working on this. So the recent stuff on gentoos in particular seem to show that the Falklands and the Antarctic are very different in terms of subspecies. There's other researchers working on trying to accurately split rockhoppers. So are they one species or are they several? And it certainly appears that they're several species, so the northern, southern and eastern. And that means that if you lump them all together, they might be declining, but not of immediate concern. When you split them, that suddenly makes them of concern because it's a small population declining. So yes, I think the rockhoppers around Tristan da Cunha and Gough in the South Atlantic, those are relatively at risk. In terms of species, the African penguin is endangered, or is it critically endangered, I think.
I think I was, just going back to one of the points you mentioned there, I was surprised actually at the visible difference between the gentoos on the Falklands and down on the peninsula. You can actually see the size difference.
Yeah.
So you don't even, you need to confirm it, but you don't even need to.
But that's
the genetics.
quite an interesting thing where the genetics shows you how long they've been different and what the underlying differences are. And of course, some of those differences in terms of feet colour and things like that, and potentially size, are just what they're eating. But it's interesting. You need both, and then it becomes robust and interesting. It tells you why.
Yes, definitely. I've always assumed Pingu is an emperor penguin, but I don't know why.
I have no idea.
What was the other bit?
It's swimming. Just underwater flying. Yes,
basically,
to a degree.
yeah.
So it's very much flapping the flipper like that. The difference with flight is because water is denser, you can potentially get a bit of forward motion on the upstroke as well. How far can they swim, and do they ever go on vacation to other parts of the world? So how can they, do they go on vacation? I think time off, not really. Time off in the sense that they replenish their fat reserves over winter usually. How far do they go? Potentially thousands of miles. Emperor penguins in the off season go. Emperor and kings go thousands of miles. Is that time? No. I thought you were saying time is up. I think I will if you will.
I can't do one at all.
I can't do one. That's probably someone we know. So
it is probably someone we know. I don't even know how to describe it because they're all quite different, actually. Particularly, chicks to adults in different species, they make quite different noises. You'll just have to YouTube it. Yeah. That's the cop-out answer. Any more questions coming in? Oh, there's the one that I always get asked, which is why they don't live at the North Pole. Just to preempt that. So firstly, as a kind of caveat, there's a very similar bird that was in the north. So the great auk, which is unfortunately now extinct due to human hunting, the name for that actually was penguin or penguin. And so when the first people to find penguins south saw those, they called them the same thing. That was how similar they looked. But that's actually an example of something we call convergent evolution. So they look very similar, but the great auk, of course, is not a penguin. But it kind of shows that there is an ecological niche up there that perhaps penguins could fill. But firstly, now they don't really have a way of getting up there. They'd have to cross oceans and areas which they're not adapted to. They have predators up there in the form of polar bears, which if you were to pick up a penguin, thanks, and put it up north, then that would probably not end too well for the penguins. But
they could survive. They could live on offshore rocks in the same way that a lot of poorly flying seabirds do.
It's more the bear aspect, but
yeah,
I think some could survive.
But
for sure.
places like Norway, Scotland, yes, they would.
Yeah.
I think
Penguins in Scotland.
If those niches weren't already occupied.
Yeah, that's the fact is that in ecology you have things called niches, basically the area in terms of what they do in the food there, etc., etc. And if they're already filled, then there's too much competition. Are they scared of humans or friendly? They often haven't seen a lot of humans, therefore they don't have a reason to be scared of them, which means generally, as far as I've ever found, they're more curious and inquisitive. And therefore friendly. I haven't felt, penguins being unfriendly, but it depends. If you were to go up to them and be threatening, then of course they're going to defend themselves. So when we do our research, we try to be very unobtrusive and not do anything that would make them worried.
Yeah, it's so they don't have terrestrial predators. So if you're quiet and you're low down and you're not jerky, sudden, and threatening, then they're very inquisitive. And if you sit down and stay quiet, they will generally come up and have a look, unless they're busy and on the move. So in terms of, they're very inquisitive, and they will often come up and have a peck.
Yes. Yeah. So we're not destroying the image of the penguins too much. They are very charismatic and nice and friendly. Yeah. Any more questions? Can you think of anything else I've missed?
Wrap it up and get back to the Twitter takeover.
Yes, we're doing a Twitter takeover today of the Oxford Sparks Twitter account. So all day it will kind of be a day in the life. You'll be able to see what we're doing, as well as we'll be tweeting about research that's both going on in our lab and also our collaborators' labs, and general interesting penguin facts and things. Of course, you can tweet back at us and ask anything else that you've forgotten to ask now, or anything more specific about our research. Tell us something interesting that you think we might want to know about. And please go on Penguin Watch, penguinwatch.org, and click on some penguins. Only need to do a couple of images, and then you'll think you've contributed to penguin conservation today. So that's probably it. Thank you for all of your questions. They're really great.
Penguin Day.
Yes, happy World Penguin Day.